Organised Labour has called for the permanent introduction of a basic income grant in South Africa from next year. Cosatu, Nactu and Fedusa held their mid-year Nedlac Organised Labour School this week. And this was to assess progress made on the implementation of key policy interventions in the country. They welcomed the reinstatement of the special 350 Rand COVID-19 grant and believe this can be used as the foundation for the basic income grant. Let's get more from Cosatu's parliamentary coordinator, Matthew Parks. Good afternoon, Matthew.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
The 350 COVID-19 grant ending end of March 2022, that's not enough. Why are you pushing for a permanent introduction, rather, of the basic income grant?
Sure. Basic premise for pushing for it is that we have an unemployment rate of over 40%. That means you have more than 12 million persons with no source of income, no source of relief or help. I think we saw the recent violence in KZN and Gauteng. Leave aside the political and the criminal elements to it, but it fed into a sea of poverty, of unemployment, of despair and hopelessness. So we felt that the 350 COVID-19 grant needed to be reinstated for all persons with no source of income across the country. I think there is broad political consensus across party lines in South Africa. There is a need for some sort of basic income grant to help those with no source of income. And you need to do it when the country is in its deepest economic recession in 100 years, when unemployment is at its highest level ever, and it is affordable. The 350 grant right now only costs government about 24 billion rand, which is far cheaper than the amount of losses we saw in the violence, which is over 50 billion rand. We think we need to have it to make sure people have got a minimum amount of money to buy food, to take care of their families. Research has shown that it has actually helped also for workers to be able to pay for transport, to go and to look for work and to find jobs so they can get off of the being dependent upon the state for some sort of relief. But our main concern now is that government has only budgeted for it to be retained until the end of the financial year. We think it needs to be extended, to be made permanent, and that this is basically the stepping stone for a basic income grant. I think for us, once it's extended, it's about at what level can we push it to. Ideally, it should at the very least be pushed to the food poverty line, which is currently about 585 Rand before inflation. I think for us that is a critical stepping stone, but you can't have a society where 40% of the nation has no source of income. That places a huge burden upon those who are lucky to have jobs, and it also is a ticking time bomb for all sorts of violence and social dysfunctionality to erupt.
Yeah, okay, Matthew, let's take a look very quickly into some of the things that the Green Paper actually proposes as options, you know, depending, of course, where government would like, what government would like to achieve first. What are these proposals?
Sure, there's quite a few useful ones. I think one of the key elements is that currently we have only about 6% of society of workers who are able to afford retirement. 94% can't afford. Many workers earn too little to be able to actually save for pension funds. Many workers are also highly indebted and often cash out the pension funds when they change jobs, etc. So we need to find a variety of mechanisms from the state, from the private sector, from workers to pool resources together to make sure that everybody is able to save, and those who need help are assisted to save, to look at incentives to encourage people to save as much as possible, and also to make sure when workers retire, they're not dependent upon the state for a small pension. They're not dependent upon their children or their grandchildren. They have jobs and able to take care of them. You don't want to see people retiring in absolute poverty. So clearly the system right now is broken. The fact that 94% of workers can't afford to retire shows you that. But also equally that we don't have a comprehensive social security net, that you have 12 million people with no source of income falling through the cracks with no element of solidarity. So we need to find the right balance. We've got a proliferation of funds in the state itself, from pensions to disability grants to the unemployment insurance fund, injury on duty fund. There's a lot of inequality amongst them. Many people are covered by some, but not by all. For example, we saw during this pandemic that the unemployment insurance fund has assisted 11 million workers. It covers 11 million, but there's about 5 million workers who are not covered. Workers who work in the informal sector, workers who work through e-hailing, Uber drivers, etc., the self-employed, musicians, artists, sports persons. So we need to really have a thorough review. I think this discussion document is a good starting point to begin that discussion, to see what is the right balance, what can we afford to do as a country. But the bottom line is we need to make sure that we leave no one behind, that no one is abandoned by society.
You know, Matthew, if studies say that a decent standard of living is suggested for an income of around 7,500 rand, and this is per person per month, do you think that we'll be able to achieve this at some point, and when could that be in this country?
Sure, we have to achieve it. We can't afford to continue to be paying people a slave wage, poverty wages. Who is going to buy your goods that you produce at the clothing factories or on the farms, etc., if people can't afford it? Again, paying people poverty wages makes them less productive. An unhealthy person is not a productive worker. We need to have a discussion about what is the maximum wage you can pay CEOs. So you have the CEOs of the big 5 banks earning 150,000 rand every single day, yet the cashier makes about 300 rand a day. So we need to begin discussing about what is the minimum wage we should be paying people, not just the minimum wage by law, but a living wage, for example, 7,500, which, as you said, is closer to about a decent living wage. What is the top wage you can pay people to? So you have more of an equitable approach to paying people and to society at large. But of course, to do that, we need to also grow the economy. We need to create jobs, because we can't be shedding jobs every quarter like we've done again today. People have got jobs, they're able to buy the goods, they're able to take care of the families, they're not dependent upon the state. They can help stimulate the economy too. It's also about government providing relief right now to those companies, to those workers and communities who have suffered through the violence in KZN and Gauteng, in the economic lockdown over the past year, in the recession. It's also about what banks can do to help grow the economy, to stimulate local production. We also need to say, what can we do as consumers to buy locally produced goods? What can companies, what can unions, what can government do to support buy local campaigns?
Matthew,
of course, we also need to look.
We're going to have to leave it there, even though I did want you, if you can quickly just respond into what are you expecting government's response to be out of this green paper and the proposals? Just a quick answer to that.
Sure. Look, I think we're expecting them to table at Nedlac, so we can begin the discussion soon. They've given a 4-month window period for public engagements. I think for us it's a positive step in the right direction. We've always called for comprehensive social security as Cosatu. I think also what's critical now is to find what are the funding mechanisms to make sure it can happen in a way that is affordable to everybody, to the economy, and to the state. But the sooner it can happen, the better for society at large.
Thank you very much. Matthew Parks is Cosatu's parliamentary coordinator, talking to us there about the permanent introduction of a basic income grant in South Africa.